Sometimes we struggle through this so-called life, waiting for something to change. And now all of it's gone, the pain is lived far too long. Black is the sky filled with rage. It's been too long, we'll right this wrong. We will remember today. He said, whoa, our revolution. One more time, we're revolutions. Say it again, whoa, our revolution. Now for the time for retribution. Say it again, that's right. Today's a memory, your fading light will set us free, free from these thoughts of despair. Your end is coming fast, we're moving forward, we won't look back. The message will be loud and clear. It's been too long, we'll right this wrong. We will remember today. He said, whoa, our revolution. One more time, we're revolutions. Say it again, whoa, our revolution. Now for the time for retribution. Say it again, that's right. We stood tall in the pouring rain. Our bodies broken, our hearts brave. 1 million strong, we can't fall. It's all fun. And once for all that he said, we are a revolution. One more time, we're for solutions. Say it again, whoa, we are a revolution. Now for the time for retribution. Say it again, that's right, we want a revolution. We're living for today. It's time of a revolution, and we will remember. We want a revolution. It's time we had our say. We want a revolution, and we will remember today.
I have a confession to make. I am a convicted felon. I once went to the movies and I saw fire on screen, and in my excitement, I yelled out, "Fire!" And the theater was crowded. I knew it was wrong. I knew I had no First Amendment right to say it. The police immediately came and arrested me under California's Anti-Fire in a Crowded Theater Statement Act of 1989. I spent 10,000 years in jail. But when I got out of jail, I was inspired to become the lawyer that I am today, to make sure that no one would ever commit the same First Amendment speech violations that I did in my younger days. Now, obviously, all of that is complete nonsense. But if you spent any time online, you might not know that. If I took a quick poll and asked you, what are you absolutely 100% not allowed to yell in a movie theater? Well, everybody knows the answer to that question. And almost everyone is wrong about that particular question. But don't worry, even the people in government, perhaps especially the people in government who should know better, do not know better. Let's check in with New York Governor Kathy Hochul.
Yeah, I'll protect the First Amendment any day of the week, but you don't protect hate speech. You don't protect incendiary speech. You're not allowed to scream fire in a crowded theater. There are limitations on speech.
Unfortunately, we are now all dumber for having watched that clip. The only thing that we've learned is that the governor of New York does not understand free speech at all. But luckily, I am fired up to explain how everyone keeps getting the First Amendment wrong. So let's get this party started. Now, obviously, everyone on the internet thinks you simply cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, I am here to tell you that yes, you can generally yell fire in a crowded theater. Generally speaking, it's legal. Say it with me.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Now, this First Amendment myth has a long history that simply will not die. And the origin of it comes from an opinion from none other than one of the most esteemed jurists in history, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. He wrote, quote, "The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic." And millions of Americans across the decades have decided that this means you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Justice Holmes never qualified that the theater had to be crowded. He simply said that shouting fire when there was no fire and causing a panic was not protected speech. So why did Holmes bother to say this? Were Americans in the early 1900s constantly pulling hilarious pranks in which they falsely claimed that theaters were on fire? No, not really, but deadly theater fires were common in that particular time. It was standard practice that due to lax regulation, when all of the seats in a theater were sold out, the owners would seat people in the aisles and stairways. Sets and props used to be made of extremely flammable materials. There wasn't much ventilation, and theaters rarely marked exit doors. In 1903, at least 602 people died in a fire in Chicago's Iroquois Theater, which only had one entrance. Chicago building codes required separate staircases for every balcony, but the architects who designed the Iroquois ignored the rules, and instead, the theater just had one staircase so that everyone could see and be seen regardless of social class. And when the fire broke out, the building was completely full. Aisles and stairways were full of theatergoers. They ran over each other trying to get through the front doors. And the Iroquois Theater fire was not a unique event. There were so many deadly theater fires that people genuinely were afraid of crowded spaces. So all of this formed the background for when Justice Holmes wrote his famous opinion in the 1919 case of Schenck versus the United States. Now, you might be surprised, but the facts of the Schenck case bear no resemblance to a crowded theater full of fire-phobic patrons. Now, Charles Schenck was a socialist who attempted to distribute thousands of leaflets encouraging people to evade the World War I draft. The government charged him with violating the Espionage Act by conspiring to cause insubordination in the military and Navy. The Supreme Court upheld Schenck's conviction and the constitutionality of the Espionage Act, finding that Congress could regulate speech that created, quote, a clear and present danger. Now, all Schenck did was send leaflets to recently conscripted soldiers suggesting that the draft was a form of involuntary servitude in violation of the 13th Amendment. And Justice Holmes wrote that the widespread dissemination of the leaflets was sufficiently likely to disrupt the conscription process. That was what gave rise to his so-called clear and present danger. Justice Holmes conceded that the letter may have been constitutionally protected in many places in ordinary times, but determined that the character of the writing, quote, depends upon the circumstances which it is done. Therefore, Holmes held, quote, the question in every case is whether the words used are used in such a circumstance and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. And in so doing, he compared the leaflets to falsely shouting fire in a theater, provoking a panic, the type of speech that he thought could be regulated. Now, the clear and present danger test was favorable to the government, particularly during wartime, when the court gave the government wide leeway to restrict speech. But Justice Holmes realized his analysis in Schenck wasn't very good and was rife for abuse, and changed his mind within a year. In the case of Abrams versus the United States, another case involving anti-war activists, the Supreme Court upheld convictions of Russian immigrants who were charged with violating the Sedition Act. This time, though, Holmes dissented from the majority. He advocated for a much more rigorous test, arguing that the government should only be able to punish speech if there was an imminent danger that it will bring about the substantive evils. But Schenck's clear and present danger test was eventually overruled 50 years later when the court replaced it with the imminent lawless action test, which protects a broad range of speech, though you might remember it from the Brandenburg incitement test, which, let's just say it's very relevant these days. So Holmes's analogy was not only imperfect, but it was dicta in the very case that created it, meaning it never had any force of law, and it was based out of a case that is simply no longer good law at all. And the problem with the fire in a crowded theater analogy, generally speaking, is that people think it stands for the proposition that you can regulate almost any bad speech. But it was a terrible analogy from the very inception, and it was used to regulate speech that was clearly protected. So, pop quiz, when could you yell fire in a crowded theater? Well, first of all, if there was an actual fire, you would be warning other people, so you're well within your rights to yell fire when there is a fire in a theater. Probably when you mistakenly, but in good faith, think that there is a fire, even if there isn't one, even if it was false, but you thought that there was a fire. Again, you'd be warning people to try to get to safety. Maybe if you needed to get someone's attention quickly, like an active shooter situation, where you need to concisely convey that people need to get out of there very quickly. Maybe when you were telling a joke, if you're a comedian and it's a punchline to a joke, you can probably yell fire in a crowded theater. If the movie you're watching has fire in the title or fire on screen, or a script calls for an actor to yell fire. I mean, the number of situations where you could actually yell fire in a crowded theater probably drown out situations where you could not yell fire in a crowded theater. That magical phrase is judged by the exact same First Amendment standards that we use to judge every other kind of speech. So the question is, did you intend to cause panic in circumstances likely to cause a panic and injury? Well, if not, then you're probably in the clear. But that takes us to the second most pervasive free speech myth, which is that hate speech is not free speech. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that it absolutely is.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
Things that are hateful understandably make people uncomfortable, which is why even good actors like Lou Diamond Phillips have bad takes like this. Let's all please remember that hate speech is not free speech. It comes with a cost to real lives. Let's make kindness our default setting, which is a nice sentiment, but it's also extremely wrong. Hate speech is free speech, according to the Supreme Court. Oh, wait a minute. I'm getting a breaking news alert. According to the Supreme Court, even the Supreme Court has stated that hate speech is not protected speech. Well, I'm sorry, random Twitter guy, but the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that the First Amendment protects even repugnant and hateful expressions. For example, the court ruled that the Westboro Baptist Church could protest at the funerals of dead soldiers carrying signs that say, "Thank God for dead soldiers," and that have homophobic slurs. Similarly, the court struck down a St. Paul ordinance that made it a crime to place a burning cross or swastika anywhere, quote, in an attempt to arouse anger or alarm on the basis of race, color, creed, or religion. The court also ruled that Nazis could march through the streets of Skokie, Illinois, a town where many Holocaust survivors lived. In other words, hate speech, as a part of free speech, is settled law that won't be overturned anytime soon. But if the concept of the First Amendment having no protections for hate speech isn't really a thing in American law, then why do so many people think that hate speech is illegal? Well, they might be looking at how European countries regulate speech. Those other countries generally don't have the same kind of First Amendment protections. And after the horrors of World War II, many European nations passed laws criminalizing speech that incites hatred or advocates genocide against certain groups. This is certainly a point of controversy in the United States, where many people wish that First Amendment protections did not attach to what they consider to be hate speech. And you might not like it, but in America, the solution to hate speech has traditionally been, in the words of Justice Louis Brandeis, quote, more speech, not enforced silence. And this might not please everyone.
Hello, Kitty.
Hey, how's it going? I saw you were in here alone, so I was like, yeah, I'll pop in and say hi. I love Legal Eagle. He's great.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can finish the video and yeah. Cool. Thanks for coming.
Please everyone, but it's certainly an easier principle to apply than an outright ban on hate speech. Why? Well, because it's really hard to define what constitutes hate speech. Certainly, President Ron DeSantis would define hate speech differently than President Elizabeth Warren. But at least for the time being, if you believe that the government should be able to regulate hate speech, I'm allowed to call you a stupid idiot. That takes us to the third myth, which involves the application of the First Amendment to private corporations. The free speech clause of the First Amendment prohibits, quote, the government from abridging the freedom of speech. It does not stop private people or private corporations from censoring speech. And by that same token, whenever people are complaining about Section 230 and the internet and protecting big corporations, almost 100% of the time, the thing that they are upset about is not Section 230, but rather the First Amendment itself. So, for example, if you call up a radio show and the host cuts you off and hangs up on you, your rights were not violated. You can't force the radio show to give you a platform. Similarly, if you post misinformation on Twitter and the company decides finds that your tweet violates their rules, they can ban your account. You can't force Twitter to give you a platform, despite how hard you are trying. Or if you post a comment on someone's food blog saying that no one should ever put pineapple on pizza, they have a right to delete your comment, even though it is absolutely correct. But again, you can't force someone else to promote your speech. And the best way to think about this dichotomy is by considering public versus private schools. Public schools are an arm of the government. The Supreme Court has said that public school students, quote, do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech and expression at the schoolhouse gate. Students have a limited right to wear expressive clothing and hand out petitions as long as they don't disrupt the functioning of school. But private schools, on the other hand, do not give students those same rights because a private school isn't a state entity.
Cranbrook, that's a private school.
Many people believe this is very unfair, but in America, the First Amendment protects your expression from intrusion from the government, not from private corporations. When you're talking about private corporations, you always have the option to take your ball and go home, to leave a popular platform, and then create a platform where no one actually goes there. But at least you can express yourself. And while most people probably understand this, surely it must be the case that you cannot display profanity in public with abandon. Like this particular Twitter take, if you know someone who is displaying a flag or sign with profanity, you need to report it. It is against the law to have public profanity in the open, even on private property. Report them and have the police have it removed. If they refuse, file a lawsuit. Now, this particular bad legal take involves at least two common myths. One, you can't display profanity, and two, you can't desecrate the flag. Well, in a 1971 case, again involving the draft, the Supreme Court established that the government cannot criminalize the display of profane words in public places. In the case of Cohen versus California, Paul Cohen wore a jacket with the words "fuck the draft" into an LA courthouse. Police arrested him for disturbing the peace. Cohen was convicted and sentenced to 30 days in jail. An appeals court affirmed the conviction because it was foreseeable that wearing the jacket could cause a violent reaction. As you can see, in every era, the US government was really sensitive about people expressing their desire to avoid the draft. But a closely divided 5-4 Supreme Court reversed the conviction. Justice John Harlan, leading the majority, held that the phrase "fuck the draft" wasn't an obscenity, nor was it fighting words. It couldn't be an obscenity because the statement wasn't erotic, and it couldn't be fighting words because it was just a general statement, not one directed at inciting imminent lawless action. California argued that public profanity invaded the interests of unwilling viewers, especially women and children. Justice Harlan memorably observed, though, that people who were offended by the jacket, quote, could effectively avoid further bombardment of their sensibilities by averting their eyes. And although some people hate profanity, quote, one man's vulgarity is another man's lyric. Justice Harlan also wrote, quote, the Constitution leaves matters of taste and style so largely to the individual. In other words, there's no legal reason you can't just come out and say, Joe Biden, rather than "let's go Brandon," you cowards. And at the same time, if you wanted to, you could desecrate the flag. Flag desecration includes everything from burning the American flag to putting it on a beer bottle. Congress has tried to ban flag desecration for decades, but the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that you have a First Amendment right to hurt the flag. Though in the early 20th century, the Supreme Court did uphold a number of flag desecration statutes. But by the 1960s, the court had reversed course. For example, when civil rights leader James Meredith was shot in Mississippi in 1966,
I'm sorry, but how the fuck do you hurt a flag?
Sidney Street took his own flag into the street in New York City and lit it on fire. Street, a black veteran of World War II, said, quote, if they can do this to James Meredith, we don't need a flag. The city fined Street $100. Street filed a lawsuit and eventually it reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court reversed Street's conviction. It held that Street could not be punished for burning the flag. Then in 1974, the court reversed the conviction of a college student who put a peace sign on the flag. The state prosecuted the student under a law that made it illegal to improperly use the flag. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that this was symbolic speech that was protected by the First Amendment. And when the court reversed a flag burning conviction in 1989, the Senate and President George H.W. Bush were outraged, and Congress enacted the Flag Protection Act. Protesters responded by immediately burning flags, and they were convicted under federal law. But the Supreme Court struck that law down in the United States versus Eichmann, holding that, quote, if there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. Though if you go out there and exercise your right to truthfully yell fire in a crowded theater or burn a bunch of flags in the street, you'll probably build up quite the appetite. And today's sponsor, Factor 75, can help with that. Because Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever.
All right, yeah, that's fine, cool. Yeah, seen enough ads today.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, when it comes down to it, those right-winger type people, it's like corporations are allowed to be treated like people and the flag should be treated like people, but actual people shouldn't be treated like people.
Yeah, and we can say whatever we want to them. It's but that's not. I don't think that's like technically true because states do have laws against hate speech, but that's not constitutional, right? So it just depends. It varies from state to state. So
yeah, I think there are some of the more like liberal states that take a more firm stance, but honestly, I don't know, like it could be fought if you really truly wanted to, because federal law would trump state law in a case like that. So I mean, even if there are more local or state ordinances, I think that you would, be able to fight that. I mean, freedom of speech is great, but then, there are other places where you have freedom of speech too, not quite as broad as we have here, but like Canada has free speech, but they also have hate speech laws, and I think they're doing just fine. In a lot of ways, they're doing better than we are in a lot of different metrics. So, who's to say who's doing it better? Like, I think I'd rather
in a lot of ways
that.
it's like a Monty Python skit though, like with certain people like on the conservative side, they're like, help, I'm being oppressed. I can't just, say whatever I want to people, that it's hurting me. Ow. So I think there's like there should be more specificity in the Constitution. Like it's like just such a general statement, or the Second Amendment, for example, or a First Amendment right now, but they're both just such like there's no context behind them. So it's like you can't really so you're reasoning the specific laws by like these when you set a precedent, right, in a particular instance, and that instance could be like totally anomalous, like this never happens, but we're going to establish rule of law by this one instant that came before the court. And
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, the Constitution itself was meant to be a living document. It was meant to change with the times. They deliberately made it kind of vague when it was written. And like the issue with precedents, like that's one of the reasons why qualified immunity is so bad, because if a cop can point to any case before, that is even slightly similar, then they can basically get off of like killing people, even if they shoot somebody in the back that's running away.
Well, yeah, cops get the benefit of the doubt every time. Well, unless they have a body camera, because now if we can see them on a body camera, and then it's like, okay, well, obviously this guy was behaving really
Even
badly.
that's not guaranteed, though.
Did you see the case? I don't remember what state it was in. They chased this guy down because he was evading, and I think they ended up beating him to death. Or nearly to death. I mean, it was like really bad. And there were 4 cops on him. And it was, it wasn't a racial thing because the guy was a black guy, and I think most of the cops on scene were black. So they were like, okay, it wasn't even a racial thing. They were just mad because he was running. They decided to give him a beat down, but it's all caught on this like surveillance cam. It was like another police camera on the street. And, yeah.
I mean, my cynical and jaded side wonders if the fact that, the officers that did it were black is part of why they are being charged. Because it seems like when it's white officers that do a very similar thing, they tend to get away with it. 9 times out of
Yeah,
10.
all of a sudden the video disappears, or there's no
Yes, Spooky, I am a fucking witch. I am future
No,
Empress of Hell.
You've been bathing in the blood of virgins, yes. Are those Cheez-Its? Are you eating Cheez-Its? Okay, I was like, yep, okay. I know that deliciousness.
Guilty pleasure.
Mhm.
You
So,
should join us,
I'm like,
Spooky. Come on. Get your
yes,
British
come in.
ass in here.
I'll pull this one back up. I found this. So I didn't know the statute, but Legal Eagle brought this one up, and Section 230.
Yeah, the conservatives
47.
are losing their shit over that because Trump is like, we need to repeal Section 230 because it basically, and it won't do what they think it will do, because if they repeal it, then it means that like these platforms are going to be even less free in their speech, because it would allow, basically, say someone posts misinformation about a vaccine on Twitter. Well, then Twitter could be held liable if somebody is injured because of that misinformation. So they will be even more strict with their moderation policies to cover their own asses. So they
Right.
think that getting rid of 230 will allow them to not have their shit taken down when they post misinformation or nasty shit, but it would actually have the exact opposite effect.
And so the problem with this, right, it's not preemptive, right? It's reactionary lawmaking. They say, oh, well, we've had these extreme cases where now we need to, and so we know more and more people are getting their information this way. And so now we need to prevent this from, it's like putting, a warning label on the bleach that says, do not drink, keep out of reach of children. And it was like, oh, that should have been common sense, but instead we need to have the warning label. And that's kind of what they're doing to the social media platforms. They're like, yep, sorry, but
Yeah, but it's funny because the ones that are always calling, liberals like me snowflake are the same ones that get really upset when a corporation decides that they want to stop, publishing racist books, and they get their panties in a twist over it.
Spooky, I will pay you $5 American. I'll send it to you on PayPal or wherever. What's up, girl?
Spooky's good people. I love Spooky.
Yeah. The rapidly developing array of internet and other interactive computer services available to individual Americans represent an extraordinary advance in the availability of educational and informational resources to our citizens. These services offer users a great degree of control over the information that they receive, as well as the potential for even greater control in the future as technology develops. The internet and other interactive computer services offer a forum for a true diversity of political discourse, unique opportunities for cultural development, and myriad avenues for intellectual activity. The internet and other interactive computer services have flourished to the benefit of all Americans with a minimum of government regulation. Increasingly, Americans are relying on interactive media for a variety of political, educational, cultural, and entertainment services. So it is now the policy of the United States to promote the continued development of the internet and other interactive computer services and interactive media. That's interesting. This is in law. It's the first. That's a policy enshrined in law.
I mean, a lot of people don't seem to understand, what the First Amendment actually means. And like that's the whole legal video and everything. But I mean, so many people they get upset, like, you know, they don't realize that you have the freedom to speak how you want, but that doesn't mean you're free from consequences. Like if you walk into your job, you're not going to get arrested for telling your boss to go fuck himself. However, you are likely going to get fired, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think part of it comes down to we don't really have civics classes anymore. So people don't really understand these things. And so it's that whole word of mouth thing where it's like it's how they think it should be or how they wish it would be. And then somehow that just, you know, in their mind becomes what it actually is rather than, you know, it being wishful thinking.
Okay. And so, like, when it comes to the internet, when you say we're actively promoting this, like, so I've been kind of complaining about, okay, well, yeah, politicians probably shouldn't be, projecting these messages onto social media platforms or whatever they should. But now the law actually states this is what we're doing now. Like everybody hop on board because this seems to be the way that people want to communicate with politicians, right? And so it is the will of the people.
Yeah, and I don't know, like it's a double-edged sword, like having politicians on Twitter and the like. Yes, it is nice to, you know, have a better shot at like, you know, actually interacting with and seeing like, you know, what these politicians are saying. But then the other side of that is you then have politicians that will spread misinformation or, you know, incite others with, you know, sarcastic type messaging. And I don't know, like I don't really see a good answer. Like there isn't really just a all right, this is like the best way or this is what we should do. I mean, it's there's no black and white. It's just muddled shades of gray.
Well, it seems to me the first thing is that that's what they would have been doing anyway. These politicians would have been spreading this misinformation regardless. So now they're just being held accountable for it, right? So that's a good thing, right? So now we can see them do it. They're openly exposing themselves, and then they can just compile lies onto lies, and whatever. And then my Chromebook is overheating a bit. Okay. But it's like, okay, so we're going to allow them to do that, but then can they be prosecuted for that message? Like, we're not going to prosecute the platform. We're going to prosecute the person who's spreading the misinformation if there are people who are in like public office. I think that should be something that's in the law, right? Like elected officials should not be actively lying to their constituents. Like if you'd say, well, no, we have reason to believe that you're lying, like, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, but again with the double-edged sword thing, like sure, they could be spreading that misinformation, you know, at say a town hall or something, but their reach is greatly increased by social media. So when you could have hundreds or maybe a few thousand people in an auditorium listening to them spread their bullshit, or millions, you know, across the country, people that wouldn't hear it, you know, otherwise. Like I know there's like some merit to, you know, the whole daylight is the best disinfectant, but there's also the fact that by expanding the reach, especially when you have people that have been desensitized to fact checking and to critical thinking, where they're not going to listen to the fact checks, they're not going to listen to information that basically goes against what they want to believe, which is, these lies that are being spread. So the reach aspect of it is an issue.
So Section 2, to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the internet and other interactive computer services, unfettered by federal or state regulation. So, okay, this is a capitalistic idea, right? Vibrant and competitive free market. So it's sewn in there. 3, to encourage the development of technologies which maximize user control over what information is received by individuals, families, and schools who use the internet and other interactive computer services. 4, to remove disincentives for the development and utilization of blocking and filtering technologies that empower parents to restrict their children's access to objectionable or inappropriate online material. That seems problematic. And 5, to ensure vigorous enforcement of federal criminal laws to deter and punish trafficking in obscenity, stalking, and harassment by means of computers. So there is some, some common sense in there, but this one, objectionable material, like what would qualify as something that children can be censored from by their parents, right? Which I think is... Or would it be objectionable online as opposed to other places? Like, I don't know. Ultimately, kids should be regulated on the internet, but to what extent?
Yeah, like don't allow them necessarily to see, like ISIS beheading videos or pornography, like common sense things. But I mean, that can also be used to keep them from learning about science and how the earth is not 6,000 years old.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, it's just
Greetings
all
to
shades of
Thomas
gray.
Barrett and Christian Carpenter. Thank you for coming. Yeah, and so the vagary is kind of necessary. Trafficking in obscenity. I don't know what obscenity. Trafficking in obscenity. This is an interesting way of phrasing that. Stalking and harassment, obviously, though, are important, but trafficking in obscenity. I'm not sure I know what that means.
I mean, I like just a bare bones reading of it, I would think that they would be talking something along the lines of like pornography. There are people that are trying to, ban pornographic material.
Do you think that should be enshrined in law? How would we get there?
I personally don't think so. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about minors, yes, like, that is definite. But when it comes to like pornography made by consenting adults, like, fuck it, let it go. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm very like pro do what you want as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Well, this statement is problematic because we want to ensure vigorous enforcement of federal criminal laws to deter and punish. I mean, essentially, that could be construed as pornography, among other things. But like, what is obscene? Obscene what? Just obscenity in general. So that I don't know if that should be there. Yeah. I disagree with that statement in the law. You know what I mean? I don't know that we should be having the government regulating obscenity, but that's just my opinion. Now, stalking and harassment, yeah. I mean, yeah. The protection for Good Samaritan blocking and screening of offensive material, treatment of publisher or speaker. No provider or a user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. What? Very user shall be treated as okay. So like, if I'm platforming, UKitty, I shall not be considered to be responsible for the information you put on my platform.
Yeah, it kind of goes
Is that
to like what I had mentioned earlier, in that, like, say I run a, a woo column. Like I have like my own website and I publish like articles about healing crystals and everything like that. And I say that these crystals can cure like fucking COVID. And then you share an article from my blog, you sharing that article, or if you share it on Twitter, like Twitter would not be held responsible for the content of what I made.
right?
And like
But
that's
wait,
kind of how
we
it is
as
right now.
YouTubers, though, we're in like a third tier, right? Because we're under YouTube. So if I put up something that violates TOS, even though I didn't create that content, I could still be there could still be I could still suffer the repercussions
But
for
for that, it would be
violating
a
the TOS.
TOS thing where they would just pull it down and you might get spanked by YouTube, but you're not going to be criminally prosecuted. Whereas
Right.
if Section 230 were repealed, then if someone were to share that article like with COVID misinformation on Twitter, then Twitter could then actually be punished legally for the information in that article, even though they didn't write it and they didn't put it up. But because somebody shared it on their platform, they could be punished, which is why if they repeal 230, it's going to lead to an even stricter crackdown on free speech on the social media platforms, because the social media platforms right now use that as a shield of, it's like, hey, we're not making this content, so we're not responsible for the consequences of it being shared on our platform, as opposed to we're not making this content, and now because we don't have the shield of Section 230, we are liable for what is posted on our site. So they'll have to be a lot more stringent with their moderation if 230 is repealed.
How
And the
likely do you
Republicans don't
think
seem
that
to
is to
get that.
happen, though?
I honestly don't know, because there is a push from like the left and the right for different reasons to have 230 repealed, but it does seem the push is a little bit stronger on the right, but only because the people calling for it don't realize that they will have even less free speech on these platforms if it is repealed. They're fucking idiots. Like, and so, I mean, I don't know.
These are the same guys that just go create other platforms like Rumble anyway, right? So it doesn't even really affect them that much. They can just go fucking spar with each other anywhere else in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, try not to get into arguments with idiots. Like
Fire
playing
bad.
chess with a pigeon.
Fire bad, sir.
Yeah, no, honestly, it boggles the mind. Like I admit there are times that I'm bored and I will argue with idiots on the internet, but they're few and far between. And I just we really need to do better in teaching people critical thinking skills in school, if I'm being honest, because a lot of like our issues that we're having now come from like shitty public education, and not being taught how laws work and how to check your sources and use reputable sources, not some like blog post that tells you what you want to hear while ignoring stacks of like double blind clinical trials.
Yeah. Or like even just basic civics. So that's what I was just looking up and putting up here. It was like, people don't, like, when you think of the constitutions, the constitutional amendments, most people think of like the 14 amendments, or okay, the first 10, but there are actually like 27 amendments, right? And it's like readily available to people. Just look it up. But like, we hardly teach this in school, right? Like it seems like it's glossed over. Like
Yeah, I mean,
people
when
just
I was in
forget
school, it was
this.
an elective. Like, it wasn't mandatory. I took it, but I'm a fucking weirdo. Like I was the kid reading Mosby's Medical Encyclopedia and Grey's Anatomy for fun in high school. So like, of course, I took the strange electives. But that is not common. I am not like most people, and those classes were small. They didn't have as many people in them as a lot of the other classes, and it really sucks because they teach you how to pass a Scantron test, but they don't teach you how to file your taxes or how to balance a checkbook, or like how our fucking government actually works, other than a very cursory Wikipedia style. Like, I think honestly, Wikipedia might have more information on how the government works than some of these high school classes.
That is so true. I've definitely, at least I've learned more about the government from the internet. That like, it was just so disinteresting, and like, I didn't make it to that part of high school, right? Because I dropped out. But when they're initially teaching it in like, you know, third grade or something, just like, man, this is just so dry. For me, that was the problem, I think, with the content there. It's like, this doesn't even seem to apply to me. Like, and you just had no sense that you were a part of that system, like as a child, from my perspective. So it was like, yeah, it was extremely unimportant in my life at the time they were trying to teach it, and so it took so many years to click. Um, I need to relearn the whole thing.
And then there's lots of parts of our own history that they don't even bother teaching. Like, I was in my early 20s when I first learned about Rosewood and like the Tulsa massacre. Um, and there are a lot of people that didn't learn about it until they watched Watchmen on HBO. And like, that's kind of sad. And I got into arguments with people after that show came out that they were like, oh, yeah, that's just a dramatization. That didn't really happen. It's like, no, the US government did absolutely firebomb Tulsa, Oklahoma, because there were wealthy Black people there. Like, that really comes down to what it was. And it's just, and the longer it goes on, the more our history is being whitewashed, and we're seeing like most of the school books come from a single company in Texas, and they decide basically what's going to go in them. And it leads to a watering down of our own history where, I mean, the school books that we have now are like a copy of a copy of a copy, like with the integrity being lost compared to when I was in school 20 years ago. I graduated in the class of 2005. So it has literally been almost 20 years since I graduated high school. And looking at what, my niece is learning now compared to what I learned then, it's absolutely like stunning, like just how little is there. And so I'm always giving her like outside sources of things to basically teach her more outside of the school than she's learning in it.
Do you think that we'd benefit if there were more, if say like we stop using the resources to produce these textbooks, right? And just make all of the standardized literature readily and freely available online, and then give all the students access to computers, right? Or tablets or what have you. right? Doesn't that seem like it would be more efficient? But then is like you would have to have some mode of channeling them to the standardized information and keeping them away from any other misinformation or false Wikipedia articles or something, right?
Not to mention, not all students have access to internet at home. So, unfortunately, there are a lot of areas in the country where, they just don't have that type of infrastructure at home because it's completely impoverished. Like there were people, I think it was UNICEF, but I'll have to check. It was one of those charity organizations that basically helps deal with people, living in extreme poverty in like the third world. And they said that there are like cities or areas in the United States that are worse than in some of the third world countries that they visited. In fact, I think 10 of the poorest cities are in Kentucky. And I believe it was Kentucky they were talking about when they mentioned that, there are areas there that are worse than a third world country. And yet, we want to claim to be the best, but we're not even taking care of our own people. And I don't know,
Well, yeah.
that just gets to me.
Because it's like it seems to me they're more worried about keeping the economy going, right? So they're less worried about better education as long as the system steers people towards just being productive workers. Like we don't care, if you understand the government, if you're participating, like that doesn't really matter so much as like you just like get a job, keep a job. We don't care if you can be a manager at McDonald's, doesn't matter. Like so everything else is secondary to that. And that's why there's no like push to actually, educate
it's
people.
by design. It's by design because you want a less educated populace because they're more easy to control. Like essentially, the more educated a person is, the more likely they are to vote not for the Republicans. And the Republicans have always been the ones leading the charge for defunding the public education system. And it's because they want ignorant people, because ignorant people are more likely to vote for them. And, I chose the word ignorant on purpose because that word gets a lot of flack and people get very offended hearing it. But ignorant means like not knowing. It doesn't mean you're stupid. You can still be a very intelligent person, but be ignorant. And by withholding information, by withholding like education from people, it leaves them in a state of ignorance of the world around them and how things work. And that is exactly what they want in these people so that they will vote for them and keep them in power. But because of the internet, it's not working as well anymore. Like the internet came out when I was in school, but it wasn't what it is today. Like we're talking like old dial-up modems was my first foray into the World Wide Web. Nowadays, in the palm of your hand, you have a more powerful computer than, the one that put man on the moon. And you have so much information at your fingertips. And it also is leading the charge in globalization, in that I have friends on, pretty much every continent. I have friends in multiple different countries, and I can communicate with them instantly. And so the scare tactics of, socialism is communism, and if we have universal healthcare, we're going to end up with like death panels in this country. It falls flat for, millennials and especially, Gen Z that, came after us, because when it comes down to it, they can just like type out a message to a friend in Canada or, get on Discord with somebody in Norway and be like, hey, do you guys have death panels for your healthcare? No? Oh, okay, cool. So, you can literally ask people that live in these other places about their living experience. And sure, they'll have their complaints. Everybody is going to complain because nothing's going to be perfect for everyone, and all systems have their faults and flaws. However, just the fear mongering itself of, universal healthcare is socialism, is communism, will lead to death panels. It doesn't work anymore, at least not for the younger generations. And as more of them get older and start getting more engaged in the political process, and as the boomer types start dying off more, we are going to see a shift in this country. I do think it's just a matter of time before the Republicans lose power for good, unless they have like a come to Jesus moment and like greatly reevaluate how they plan on governing going forward, because gerrymandering will only allow them to claw and cling to power for so long before they just get overwhelmed by people that are just fed up with the shit.
I was watching a statement by a representative. What was his name? Justin, the guy who got removed in Tennessee. One of the guys who got removed in Tennessee. Man, he was just handing them their asses. It was crazy. So, and I always find this question interesting. We say, what is the purpose of governments? And according to ushistory.org, it says governments provide the parameters for everyday behavior for citizens, protect them from outside interference, and often provide for their well-being and happiness. Often, not always, I guess. In the last few centuries, some economists and thinkers have advocated government control over some aspects of the economy. Okay, but economics aside, like, what we're talking about is like the well-being thing, like people just being well off, right? And like, so then isn't housing a human right? Isn't housing or isn't healthcare a human right under, like, the purpose of government is to fulfill those needs, like, first, right? Keeping people
Absolutely.
healthy. Like, it should be, in my opinion. Like,
we have a constitutional right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But how can you be happy if you're having to skip meals and ration your insulin? How can you be happy if you're worried your child is going to die of leukemia because you can't afford the chemo treatments? Like, how can you be happy if you don't have a roof over your head? I mean, I am of the belief that a government has a responsibility to its citizens and that there should be a baseline below which you cannot fall, especially for wealthy first world nations that can afford to take care of everybody. We absolutely could. We could have apartment complexes. We can make sure that no child goes hungry. We can make sure that nobody is homeless and that nobody goes without health care. We can do all of that, but we choose not to.
yeah. Sorry, I have to do something. I realized there was
No worries.
something else going on here. But,
No, I could go on a rant about this shit all day.
no, I love it. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Some people kind of like tend to, disagree if you're like more conservative or whatever. And then, well, one of my conservative or formerly conservative friends recently professed to being like more libertarian now. So I guess he's come, I think the libertarians they're still like, jackasses sometimes, but at least they're a little more rational on these issues.
I mean, it depends on whether they're like more of a right-wing libertarian or a left-wing libertarian, because I mean, when it comes down to it, the political access has 4 quadrants, and I am in the left-wing libertarian camp. So I'm yay socialism, but also like full bodily autonomy. Like I would say, I don't care if you are in prison for the rest of your life. You should still be able to vote in every election if you choose to. I believe that the government shouldn't tell you what you can and cannot put into your own body, so long as you are making an informed decision. So, like I don't care if you want an abortion. I don't care who you want to fuck, how many you want to fuck. I don't care how many you want to marry, as long as everybody's a consenting adult. It's none of my fucking business. Like, I am do you, boo, as long as you're not hurting anybody. Same thing, like I said, with drugs. I think that decriminalizing and, regulating or even legalizing and regulating drugs would be better in the long run, not only because you could use the tax money to fund rehab for people that have issues with it, but also, we saw what happened with prohibition of alcohol. All it did was give a bunch of money to the mafia. And right now it's the cartels that are benefiting from our prohibition of drugs. But, that's a whole other thing. And not all lefties agree with me on that one. Like I take a very hard libertarian stance when it comes to your own bodily autonomy. The only area where I differ is I do believe in mandatory vaccinations because it's not just about you. Because
What
like
kind of
if I choose,
vaccinations, though? Wait,
well,
all vaccinations?
I
So does that
believe
include
like
flu?
yes, unless you have a medical reason, like a legit, like say an allergy or you're immunocompromised and can't get it, I believe that all vaccinations should be mandatory because to me, being anti-vax is akin to being like a drunk driver. You could, drink a fifth of vodka, get behind the wheel of a car, make it home, no issues. Or you can end up killing a bunch of people on your way. You're taking a negligent risk with other people's lives. And with vaccinations and the fact that we need herd immunity to try to protect people that are either too young or too sick or have other health complications that keep them from being able to be vaccinated, I think the public health aspect of it and the fact that we live in a society. Now, if you want to live on your own private island and never have contact with the outside world, then I don't care. Do you, like, you're not impacting anybody at that point. But the minute you're existing in a society, it's why I say do all the drugs you want, but if you get behind the wheel of a car, you go to jail, because you're putting others at risk, not just yourself. But if you want to fucking kill yourself with heroin, then you know what? Godspeed. Like, I'm not going to stop you. Like, it's your choice at that point, as long as you're not hurting other people, like, but again, and like, then if you have children under your care though, then that changes the equation as well, because if you're getting fucking blitzed out of your mind and neglecting your children, well, now you're putting other people at risk, and it's not just you. But if you're a single guy or gal just chilling on the fucking like couch, like wanting to fucking melt your brain into Swiss cheese, have at, kiddo. Like, I mean, have at, Haas. I don't care. I really don't, because you should have a right to live the life you want if you're not hurting others, and you should have the right to go out how you want if and so like, what can you say?
What's up, Phoenix Electra Circus? It's a cross between Gandhi and Hitler. So you ought do wait what we ought shit. My philosophy's getting broken here. My logic brain's going, wait, hold on a second. So wait, we've got the vaccine. I have to write shit down sometimes. So we must vaccinate, and we can use drugs, but wait, we decriminalize the drugs, but then there's the back to the education aspect, right? We got to educate people about the drugs, and then then they're probably less likely to use drugs. Hopefully, maybe,
Also,
but
I mean,
maybe
if
not.
you're providing for people's basic human needs, food, healthcare, housing, you're less likely to have, like, a lot of people use drugs as an escape. Like, it's one of those things. If I don't carry cash on me often, but if I see an unhoused person and I have some cash on me, I'll give it to them. And I've had people be like, well, why give them cash? They might use it on drugs. And I'm like, you know what? If it gives them a brief escape from their fucking misery, like, I honestly don't care. When it comes down to it, like, would I prefer them to use it on something like food? Yes. But am I going to baby them? No. Because again, like, one of the highest predicators for people getting addicted to drugs or committing crimes is poverty. Poverty is one of the largest social ailments that we have, and it leads and branches off into so many other aspects of life. Not only do you have a worse education, but you also end up usually with worse health outcomes as well, because impoverished communities tend to be areas that also, Richard, baby, shh. If you want to bounce around, go in the other room, okay? They also tend to be areas like, in Louisiana, where you have like the highest cancer rates in the country because of contaminants from industry. And so you have worse education, you have lower prospects, worse health outcomes, and once in poverty, it is very hard to get out of it. One of, like, the main ways for a family to build wealth, like generational wealth, is through property ownership. But if you start out in poverty, it is almost impossible to get to that. Even if you start out like lower middle class in this day and age with the way the housing markets are, it is almost impossible. I'll never own a home. I will never own my own house. Like, it's just not going to happen. And it sucks, it really does. But if you're attending to the basic human needs of everybody, then you'll have lower crime rates. You'll have lower amounts of people that are using drugs as a way to cope with their shitty realities. And again, like, if people are struggling and suffering, like, if something gives them an escape from that, like, I'm not going to judge them for it. Like, I know what it's like to be suffering. So, when it comes down to it, like, if you haven't suffered it, I feel like it's kind of hard for you to really like understand or judge like somebody wanting to escape that, even if it's just for a couple of hours.
Okay, I understand that. So I don't want to get too personal, but you say you'll never own your own home. Is that an issue of credit or
It's just, well, as a disabled person with no income of my own, like, I don't come from money, so when it comes down to it, me and a lot of people like me, like, our families were, working class and didn't really have the means, like, to have a home, like, most of the people that I went to high school with, none of them own a home. Like, they are all renting. And sadly, that's just going to continue to get worse since Wall Street's going in and buying all of like the single family starter homes and refusing to put them back on the market, instead renting them out to create a permanent underclass of renters. Because when people are worried about making their exorbitant rent payments, they're less likely to fucking demand better working conditions and higher wages because they don't want to end up out on the street. It's a great extortion tactic.
Yeah, I mean, I think homelessness and the cycle of despair is like one of the biggest problems that we have as far as, when you see addiction coupled with that, right? Because like rich people, yeah, they go out and they do blow and they wreck cars and then they pay their fines and they go to rehab and life goes back to normal for them for the most part, right? But poor people, they just get stuck in that cycle. They lose everything, and then people just shit all over them, and they get stuck in it, right? And it's like, okay, or you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work your way out of it, unless maybe you have like an underlying mental illness and you're not capable of doing that or something,
or a health condition. You're disabled, or have comorbidities that like put you at higher risk for ending up not able to provide for yourself as well. And like, you're right, especially since the vast majority of people that are incarcerated, like a lot of them are sitting in jails before they've even been actually convicted of anything. And there's so many people on drug related charges, and you get caught, in the wrong area with like a fucking dime bag of weed, and your life could effectively be over if the cop decides to arrest you for it, because then you'll have a criminal record and people don't want to hire someone with a criminal record. So you are less likely to be able to get out of that situation, which then causes that whole doom spiraling thing of you're barely scraping by, most of your money's going to rent, you're not eating very well. And so when you have extra money, or you skip meals to give yourself a little extra money so that you can go buy alcohol, or so you can buy some weed, or, something harder. And another issue, you have people that are chronic pain patients. And right now there is a nationwide shortage of pain medicine, pain pills, because the DEA has created a solution in, when there really wasn't a problem, because studies have shown less than 1% of these medications were ending up in the hands of people that they don't belong to when it's a prescribed medicine. But the DEA cracked down, and hydrocodone has had like a 70-something% reduction in its manufacture. And oxycodone is 65%. So there are people that are reliant on those medications to be able to function that cannot get them. The pharmacies can't get them right now. And when that happens, then instead of getting the medication dispensed from a pharmacy as prescribed by a doctor, people then go to the street and they either get a Mexican knockoff equivalent that has fentanyl in it, or they'll just go straight to heroin. So, I mean, there are a lot of issues in this country that lead people to having drug issues. And, yes, there is an opioid problem, but the government has cracked down on doctors and they've cracked down on the drug manufacturers, yet opioid deaths are at an all-time high, and they're not dropping even with everything that they've done. And it's because it's not the stuff coming from the doctors anymore that is the issue. It's the stuff coming from the streets. And you're making more people, just like how us dropping bombs in the Middle East led to more terrorists, because, what's a great way to radicalize people into hating you and your country, maybe killing their entire family in a drone strike. Same basic principle. Like you want to make more drug addicts, then take people that are dependent on these medications to function and then make it harder or impossible for them to get them. And then they're stuck going to the black market.
Everything. Oh, shit. Trying to wait for. Okay, everything got up. All right. Okay, so I'm trying to draw straight lines here. I'm like, no, wait. We went from. Okay.
No worries.
So yes, if we're okay, so the first step we have to address our own poverty in our own population, right? So that's a thing, and then we have to address poverty, healthcare. So that's homes, healthcare,
food,
basic shit.
Because food insecurity.
Food. I think we've got food pretty. I mean, yeah, I feel like we have that pretty well covered. There are certain people who just don't know they have access to the resources, but everybody should have access to the resources because they're out there, right? Or maybe some people they're in if they are unable to go to those places like food banks and stuff like that. But
even food banks, though, something you can rely on long term, or even rely on to be able to get you can get maybe staples, peanut butter and bread, but food insecurity and food deserts are a thing. So, there are areas in the country where it is actually difficult to feed yourself. And there's so much that goes to waste that just gets thrown out when it could be reallocated to helping nobody, the entire world. We make more than enough food to feed everybody on the planet. And, a lot of it ends up going to waste, which is really sad.
By the way, hello, Will. Good to see you. Yeah. Thanks for coming. No. So, okay, we have a number of issues that we definitely have the resources to address, but there are certain places
there's no political will.
We just don't. Yeah, we just don't get there. Is it maybe these people should just move out? We don't need to bring the resources to them. They need to go elsewhere to find those, we should just make them move, right?
To move. It is very expensive to move. And, if you move to a new area, especially if you're talking about lower income people where they're going to be working retail, they're going to be working fast food, they don't have the kind of job security where they can take time to go looking for other places to relocate to. It's one of the reasons why the anti-abortion legislation that's being pushed through is making it difficult, because it's you can't get an abortion in say Georgia, but you can go over, a couple states over and get one there. But not everybody has the means to be able to do that. A lot of Americans are living at or below the poverty line. And that number keeps growing.
And okay, so I guess my question is, okay, if this is the purpose of the government, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, should that not be in like the first thing that it should address, right? Like, it's not like that you have the right to just say whatever you want whenever you want. Like, that's really like kind of, I mean, yeah, cool beans, you can say what you want, but like, shouldn't it be like, we ought to do this, right? Make sure that people have housing, healthcare, food security, um, yeah, that thing. No, does that make sense? Like, because that, it seems like people just don't get that message. Like, conservatives don't believe that at all, right? They're like, no, you figure all that stuff out for yourself. Like, here's opportunity, and you just take that. And
Well, here's the thing. It's actually kind of funny. If you go issue by issue, a lot of conservatives actually agree with Bernie Sanders' policies if you don't name them as, you know, like if you don't say like universal health care, but if you say, should everybody, get health care, if you call it Medicare for all, like people understand Medicare is a program, that elderly people have access to. And um yes, there are two guinea
I
pigs,
don't.
Masha and Bear, hanging out in the back. My son got them for Christmas last year. But like when you talk about like raising the minimum wage, increasing, the standard of living for people, like going issue by issue, even conservatives, at least the voters, agree with Bernie Sanders' policies. They just hate Bernie Sanders because he has socialists attached to him.
Well, right, and nobody else that they would vote for actually supports those same policies. So that in a
Yeah.
nugget is the problem, right? So,
And like
um,
they'll allow them to don a mask, like Ted Cruz saying that he's for the workers and he's for the working man. And it's like, bullshit, Teddy, you are not. Like this, it's it just, and again, it comes back to critical thinking skills and education because they don't think to look at the voting records and see that Ted Cruz doesn't give a shit about working people, like working class people. All he cares about is fucking cushy fucking federal contracts for his buddies and tax breaks for the wealthy and corporations.
and
Like
to me, it all
if you're
comes
not
down
worth $1
to the
million or more, he
Constitution,
doesn't care.
right? Because the Constitution doesn't actually specify, so they're free to do this thing, right? It's the Constitution, right? But if the Constitution were to specifically state, hey, you people have the right to housing, healthcare, reasonable access to food, clean water,
Things you
it
need
doesn't
to
say that,
survive.
does it? Yeah, no.
It goes back to it was meant to be a living document, but you've got the originalists that they're like, oh no, it needs to be as it's written, but that wasn't how it was intended. It was meant to be vague. It was meant to be amended. It was meant to change with the times.
Yeah, and we also didn't have all the resources we have now, right? That's another issue. Like, they had the whole like industrial revolution happened. Whoa, what's that? Like, oh, yeah, because at that time you couldn't even imagine addressing food insecurity on like a mass scale. Now you can, so you can enshrine that in the document. Like, it's not unreasonable.
Even the Second Amendment, when that was drafted, like we're talking about muskets, like and like small pistols, like they're single shot, whereas now we have high capacity magazines and guns that can turn a child's body into Swiss cheese in like less than 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just what it was then and what it is now. It's like a completely different world.
Will, you already want to eat the guinea pig, so I don't know how many more. Just go take a nap, you old fart. So, okay.
technically,
argument,
the whole guns don't
this
kill people, people
argument,
kill people. I mean, the gun fucking helps. Like, and
yeah,
I own a gun. I have a concealed weapons permit. Like, I am not anti-gun by any stretch of the imagination, even though I am probably to the left of Bernie. However, I will also acknowledge the fact that it is, guns make it a lot easier to kill people. It is a very simple point and click interface that even a toddler can manage. And the bullets ripping through people's bodies, do a lot of damage, a lot more than, you can do a lot more damage and hurt a lot more people a lot more quickly with a gun than you can with anything else other than like maybe a bomb or a fucking biological weapon.
right. Yeah, and a serial killer or mass murderer with a gun is going to get a lot more than one with a knife most of the time. I mean, it's just common sense, right? Like, it doesn't even matter like what kind of gun you're talking about. But if you're talking about guns, then yeah, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to fire 30 shots per second, or I can empty a mag in 10 seconds or something, maybe. If I'm versus one or the other. If you're talking about handguns versus whatever automatic rifles. I don't like using the term assault style weapons because obviously that's whatever. But
an AR-15 will abso-fucking-lutely do a lot more damage than a fucking hunting knife.
Yeah. Or a hunting rifle for that matter. Well, I don't know about scale, like the actual rifle. Damage. Like a bolt action rifle, yeah, because you've got a much slower reload, right? But I mean, it can do a lot more damage depending on the the size of the round and everything.
Yes. But as far as spray and pray and like taking out large crowds of people, like the guy in Vegas did, having those types of weapons, the AR style weapons, they do a lot more damage and they do it a lot more quickly than even a handgun. Like, though a handgun will still do damage, but you're talking like what, 6 to like 13 rounds before you have to reload, depending on if it's a semi-automatic or a revolver. And depending on whether you have a compact mag or not. I know my Taurus came with 2 different magazines. One I think is 9 rounds and I think the other one's 13. I could do a lot of damage with that, but if I, went and used my friend's AK-47 with the barrel drum, like, I'm going to be putting a lot more lead down range a lot quicker than I could with my handgun.
Yeah. And, for people who aren't as skilled, it really doesn't take, like you said, you have to spray and pray or pray and spray or whatever. Like, you don't really have to know what you're doing. You don't have to be accurate if you're just, walking into a crowded room and letting lead fly. Like
I said, other than a biological weapon or a bomb, rifles will do, those types of rifles will do more damage to more people quicker than other weapons that we have. Like, you can go in with a bow and arrow and yeah, you could kill some people, but again, you're not going to be turning people's bodies into Swiss cheese in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Poor Will Kincaid. He's precious. He's absolutely fucking precious.
Yeah. Were you making racist comments the other night, Will? Was that? I swore I heard you saying that. I was not paying attention. I got to go back and rewatch that. I'm like, should I bleep that shit out or something? I can never tell with these people. I get the drama heads over here. It's fun because
it's gotten to the point now where you can't tell if they're a troll or not. It's like, is it a Poe or not?
Somebody's definitely getting mad. I'm just not sure. It's definitely not me. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at you.
I think it's precious. Like these people, they get their knickers in a twist so bad. It's hilarious.
Kind of automatic weapon is preferred by the U.S. military? How the fuck should I know? First Amendment, right? So, do you ever watch these First Amendment audit videos?
Oh my God. Like, it's insane.
I love this shit. So there's one local one.
And
He's
it's the
called
M4.
M4. Okay, I thought so because I got to shoot that one when I was out in Alaska, but I didn't know if they were still using it or not.
The last time I went to the range, I was there when the local SWAT team was practicing, and it was an outdoor range. And I got to fire off a 50 cal sniper rifle. That was fun. I felt that through my whole body. I was laying prone. I felt the recoil from that from my shoulder to my toes. It was crazy. Like, if I had a bruise so bad. Like, but then again, I'd fired a lot of like we had gone out to shoot shotguns there because we were trap shooting. So I ended up with a bit of a bruise on my shoulder, but feeling the recoil from that 50 cal round, like that is something I will never forget.
I can imagine, yeah. So I love this guy. He's called Bay Area Transparency. He also has one which is just like short clips. But, and this is pretty recent, 10 days ago, he goes all over to just public spaces and just chills there and waits for cops and security guards to approach him. And he just sees where it goes sideways. And, yeah, it's crazy how abusive these guys will get.
Yeah, I don't
I have to
honestly
step away
understand
from
the
the
auditor
keyboard for a minute.
people. They're insane.
No? Well, no, it's your right to be like, wherever you are, like in a courthouse or whatever, you're not breaking the law. So, and anytime they try to just come kick you out, it's like they can't do that. It's like where I work, it's technically a public space. So if you're not violating the policy, if you're not breaking the law, then you're allowed to be there. And in most instances, you're allowed to record. Although, like some say, oh, well, our policy says you can't record. But some people interpret the First Amendment as saying, well, you can't actually say that. I can record myself wherever I am, and I can record you if you approach me, or if you're a public, if you work in public service.
Yeah, no. But like a lot of the auditors I've seen,
Does
like,
that make
they're
sense?
just assholes about it. Like they're like, don't get me wrong, I'm fine with recording the police.
Yeah.
I don't like the way a lot of the auditors behave because they're very provocative, and rather than just documenting what's happening, they seem to like want to essentially start a fight. And I just think it's obnoxious.
Well, yeah. Well, they feel like they're educating people, which I understand, and in some ways, I think that's true. But yeah, in a way, it's also you're assuming how this person's gonna react towards you, and you're ready to kind of, oh, let me tell you how to do your job now. Yeah, and I mean, we've all had those with cops too. Where you're like, I know you're lying to me, but I know you lie to me, and you're like, a cop shouldn't be allowed to lie to me, and that pisses me off, but. But the it's within the bounds of the law, at least right now. So yeah. Is he at a post office?
What's going on, Bay fam? It's your boy, Bay Area transparency, and we're back at it once again. And for this video,
I'll be right back.
we're actually in 3 different cities. We're in the city of Lincoln, California. Dixon, California, and Palo Alto, California. I want to make sure I put out the best quality videos for you guys. I know you guys enjoy my videos and have my back, so I always try to put out the best quality I can possible for you guys. We have a lot of updates. I know it's been a while since we've spoken. Charges for one of the cases have been dropped. There was also a complaint form that went through, and it's wild how they justified this officer's actions when he's of me. He didn't violate that policy. Anyways, I'll try to do a live to update you guys on these things, as well as the going through for the parole officer. Like I said, there's things.
Sorry, I'm back. Is it just me or am I getting swirlies? Damn it.
Yeah, no, it's glitching.
Let me pause the video for a second. It's glitching. Okay. See if it buffers or not. Damn it, Jim. Let's plug this thing in.
There's things going on and things going through, and I like to do lives to update you guys on those things. So I'll try to do that within a week or so. If possible. Anyways, let's go ahead and get to this video. Share, like, subscribe, baby. It's BAT. Let's go. So here it goes. This is the United States Post Office out here at 380 Hamilton in Palo Alto, California. Pretty cool looking.
I'll be back over here. Go to the other screen in a minute. I heard somebody pop in over here. Right, so that's the other thing. They have cameras. So if they have cameras, you get cameras. Oh, come on.
I didn't hear you. What was that?
Are you doing something with us, your postal service?
No.
Okay. Well.
No.
This kitty popped out and back in. I see. Mwah, bugs.
Yeah, taking pictures.
Booty juice.
Yeah, for now. Yep.
Yeah, that's bad, right?
Oh, really? Got
Okay. Yeah, well, okay. I'll just accept it and move on. So, but he's not wrong. And she approached him, right? He wasn't filming her to begin with. He was just filming the post office. And then she approached and said, he's violating her privacy. Right? And he's not even arguing with her at that point. So, the way these things end up escalating, it's interesting. But yeah, obviously that video is not gonna play for us. So we want to expose
Yeah, like I said,
the internet
I
to
don't
booty
have
juice.
I don't have a problem with auditing like that. In theory, it's just in practice, they're just assholes. At least the ones I've seen.
Yeah, but it's also the again, this is interpretation of what does the First Amendment mean? Well, you have the right to peaceably assemble or gather or go to whatever public space you want, and then you can say pretty much whatever you want within some reasonable bounds, right? And people trip out when you just hang out in places, loitering, especially in like the state of California. It's like, well, you can't be here. You can't just stay here. And that goes back to like the homeless population. Where are they going to go if they don't have a home? And then they try to go peaceably, assemble their shit in a public space. And then here come the cops, and you've got, countless videos of them, like, throwing people's belongings in the street and tipping over shopping carts. And so that's why the auditor the job is important, right? Because you're going out there as Joe, law-abiding citizen. It's like, what? I'm just out here in a public space. What are you going to do to me? And so those scenarios get very interesting in the way they escalate sometimes. I think it's important to have that kind of mentality that you as a citizen are checking official representatives of the agencies of government.
No, like I agree. It just, like I said, it doesn't help when they're abrasive and confrontational about it. But it seems like it's more the amendment auditors that also do the whole sovereign citizen thing. When there's overlap between those two things, those ones are the worst.
Yeah. Sovereign citizen, kind of a BS thing. I think it's strange to me. Yeah, I do think there's some, I can find reason, in my mind, why we need like a serious overhaul in the language we use. Because again, just people, they don't understand it, they don't care, they don't feel that it applies to them, and so, in that sense, many Americans don't really feel like they're members of the community, that they're part of the society. We all feel like we're outsiders here in our own society.
It's the individualist mindset as opposed to like a more collectivist mindset.
Yeah.
But you can't be in a society and be your own like one-man island. Like, it doesn't work that way.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess some people could do it, but it seems like it's very rare that you have that person who is so such a, you say rugged individualist, I guess would be the kind of
Yeah, the rugged individualists, living off the land and the sweat of their own brow kind of thing, not relying
Yeah.
on like our nation's infrastructure for anything. But even that, it's almost impossible because you still, even if you raise your own animals and farm your own land, like you still at least some point are going to leave said property, whether it be for medical attention or because of a natural disaster or to get supplies that you need, like, and then you're using the roads that are, paid for by tax dollars. And, I don't know. But when it comes down to it, like, honestly, it's exhausting. It really is. Like seeing just how like shitty things are and that it's going to take a while for things to get better.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, the older I get, I feel like I should be somehow involved in, like, at least local politics to some extent. Like, like the more I, like, I'm always concerned about these issues. I always want to talk about these issues, and then it's like, but how do you actually do something? Well, either you volunteer in the community or you get involved in the community politics, right? Like, it's the only two ways you can really like make any type of change. Like, it's not like I'm going to, become a friggin', senator or something, but, it's like at least do that, right? Like go to community meetings and do those types of things.
I went through training to be a poll watcher for this past election. And I've been getting more involved in local politics. I think another big issue that we have is the fact that so many people believe that their vote doesn't matter. And it's like, especially on a local level, it absolutely does. On a national level, it still matters, although there's the argument to be made that as long as we have the Electoral College, some people's votes will matter more than others. Like if you're voting for a Democrat and you're in California or New York, like for president, then your vote matters less than if you're in, say, Florida or Georgia or even Texas for that matter. So I don't know, like, and a lot of people get burnt out on politics. Like I followed the news every single day from 2015 when Trump first announced until maybe 2 months ago. Like I've really like pumped the brakes on it because I was getting burnt out. Like just reading news articles every day and keeping, like a finger to the pulse of how things are going every day for, what, 6 years? Like it's exhausting. And I know, a lot of people aren't even willing to invest that much in staying aware and involved in politics. And then in states like mine, I live in Florida, and a lot of the good things that happen in the state are from ballot initiatives where we vote directly on an issue as opposed to letting the politicians handle it. But then the politicians will find a way to fuck it up. It's like using a monkey's paw to make a wish. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, case in point, we legalized medical marijuana, and it took them 2 years to stop dicking around and actually like get it done. Then in this state, there was a panel of people that would determine whether or not you got your voting rights back after serving your time in prison. And they would only see a dozen or so cases a year. And that was when Rick Scott was running it before he became a senator. Like, that's a whole other fucking can of worms. Fucking Governor Voldemort becoming Senator Voldemort. But I digress. Like, so we did it so that once there was a ballot initiative that once you served your time, unless you were convicted of a violent offense like rape or murder, if you served your time, then you got your voting rights back, automatically. Well, then they dicked around with that and they're like, oh, well, you also have to pay back any fines or fees that you might owe. And then it was this and that. And the fucking Gestapo that fucking Death Santis sent around were people that they were told by government officials that they could vote. Like at the DMV, like they would go get their driver's license renewed and they're like, do you want to register to vote? Oh, I'm a former felon. Oh, well, they passed that thing. Fill this out and it'll send it in. And then the voting bureau, they'll either tell you can or you can't. And then they sent them a voter card. Like a lot of the people that got arrested for illegally voting were sent voter identification cards by the state. And yet then they got arrested and released immediately because it was just a political stunt. But it doesn't change the fact of the matter that it is definitely swinging, DeSantis's dick around to try to scare people out of voting. And, now there's a petition to get recreational marijuana. Okay. Okay, take care. So it's basically, it's about suppressing the vote and scaring, people like former felons that, would potentially vote more Democratic, scare them away from voting. But we have on petition right now for recreational marijuana. And the last time I think it was like 1% or so that it lost by. No, not that one, because Daddy's going to need to come home. No, the little bolt at the top, and his dad wouldn't be able to make it home. But so like any good thing that happens, it's done by ballot initiative here. I think the $15 minimum wage increase here that we just voted on and passed, same thing, like putting it in the hands of the voters themselves is what gets good things done in this state.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to say hello to Jody and see you later to Phoenix. The messages in the chat. Yes. And so voter suppression, it's obviously it's a problem in any state, right? But like, it seems to be especially a problem down there in Florida, in the South. Like, we'll just generalize and say the southern part of the United States seems to have this issue more disproportionately, I think. Is that like a Civil War type like holdover? I don't know. Are they still mad?
I mean, here's the thing. Like, just the Electoral College itself, it was a compromise to the slave state because we had more warm body. The slaves didn't count as actual people. So, it heavily weighs in favor of, the states that have smaller, populations. It's why a person who votes in like North Dakota, their vote counts for way more than a person, voting in California. And as far as like the Senate goes, same thing. It's like you get 2 senators if you're in North Dakota, but 2 senators in California too, when California has more of a population in that state than half fucking country. So that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, the point still stands. Like, there's disproportionate representation in the way our electoral politics work. And because of the way that the Electoral College works, the popular vote doesn't always sync up with who actually wins the election, when if it's truly a democracy, it should. And I very much am in favor of abolishing the Electoral College. Because here's the thing.
I think I would agree on that point. Yeah.
Even if, like, I can't stand Trump, but if Trump won the popular vote, I would say, even if he lost the Electoral College, which it wouldn't happen, but like, for sake of argument, I would still be saying that we need to get rid of the Electoral College, because when it comes down to it, I believe in having a democracy where people's vote matters, and it is easier to dissuade people from voting when you can point to the Electoral College and say, see, like somebody can have 10 million more votes than the other guy, but still win because of like archaic douche fuckery. And it's a compelling argument for some people that, hey, I voted for this person, they got more votes, but they still lost. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And so I think the Electoral College has served its purpose. I mean, to be fair, I don't think it ever really had a purpose because, again, it was a compromise to slave states that, wanted to keep people as property. And that doesn't, jibe well with me. But
It doesn't make sense anymore anyway.
yeah, but regardless of the fact, like we should have grown beyond it, as a society, and going to a direct popular vote would be the best thing to do. I mean, also I like the idea of ranked choice voting, just because like that way, I think it does a better job at allowing for like third party candidates to have a better shot, because right now we have the two-party duopoly where honestly the Democrats and Republicans both suck. It's just one sucks a bit more. So like, and I don't like the lesser of two evils thing. I would rather like new ideas, fresh perspectives brought in, and I think ranked choice would give that as an option, or at least make it a little bit more feasible than continuing as we go. But at the very least, we absolutely need to get rid of the Electoral College.
Do you think we should be electing younger politicians, like in general? We should be just supporting younger candidates? Do you think that's like, does that make sense to you?
And I honestly, I don't have an issue with doing term limits too, because for every Bernie Sanders, you'll have like 5 Mitch McConnells, so it's not worth it. Like Bernie's done a lot of good in his tenure, and Mitch McConnell's done a lot of bad. And when it comes down to it, making it so that you can't have career politicians that, can be in there until the day they die, it allows for stagnation, and it allows for things to be more regressive as opposed to progressive, because it tends to be those older people that are the most opposed to change, and also that tend to benefit the most from the status quo. Like right now, the boomers are the ones, like, and not all of them, obviously, but the boomers are the ones that essentially are benefiting the most from our economy. Whereas when you get further down the generational line, like, they're struggling a lot more. And things like, a boomer might say, oh, well, I worked part-time over a summer at a McDonald's and was able to pay for college by doing that. And it's like, okay, try that now. Try paying for 1 semester of college by working part-time at a McDonald's over the summer and see how that goes. Or like, I graduated high school and I went to a trade school, and now like I've got my own plumbing business that I'm handing down to my sons, and I own this big house, and I was able to do all this. Okay, but that was then, and this is now. And the jobs market, the economy, the cost of living, none of those are the same as they were then. And because of that, like, they have very different life experiences than younger generations, and there is too much of a gap there for them to really understand the struggle of how expensive college is nowadays, or how hard it is to actually be able to buy a home, or to like go on family vacations, and that people are struggling, when they don't see it, because it's if it's not staring you right in the face, it's kind of hard to really understand or humanize something. It's like the politicians that go on their anti-gay tirades until they find out that their daughter's a lesbian, and then all of a sudden it's, well, like, people are people, love is love. It's like, yeah, because you were finally like forced to humanize gay people because somebody that you've known their entire life turned out to be gay, and you realize that didn't change the core of who they were. They just don't like dick. Okay. I mean, it really, but until people see that and experience it, it is a lot easier to just kind of write it off or not think about it, and not understand it, whether it be different social groups, or different like ethnic groups, or, what have you.
Yeah, and like a lot of people suffer from that. Like I think social isolationism, right? Like even if they do go to work every day, they just don't like encounter very many like different types of people. So when they do, or they see somebody on the news, like you said, they're so far removed from that. They're like, well, these people, they're weird. They're not like anybody I know, or it's so rare that
Human tribalism.
Yeah, but it's also like being outside of the tribe, right? Because like these are the same people that they're not going out into the public, right? This is foreign to them. They have a routine. They get up, they put on their shoes, they eat breakfast, they go to work. Maybe they stop at the same bar every day or something, have a couple drinks, they go back home, dinner with the family or whatever, and they're just stuck in that routine. So there's no other thing for them, that exposes them to any real culture, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Especially
and
for the older generations, whereas the younger generations, we are much more interconnected on the internet. Like I was mentioning earlier, I have friends in, a dozen different countries that I talk to. So I'm, able to like learn more about them and, where they are, what things are like for them. I mean, I was in my early 20s when I met the first trans person that I knew like in real life. I didn't even know like about trans people at all. I'd never encountered one. I'd never heard about it. Like the closest I came to that was, the whole like transvestite thing on Rocky Horror Picture Show, like that song, like, and that was like my only experience with anything like even close, or with Dressed to Kill, Eddie Izzard's stand up. Her stand up. So like, well, now she's come out as trans, but back then it was just, it was just somebody that was, putting on women's clothing, but was not, out as a trans person. But I didn't know, but I don't know. I've always been kind of weird where I just treat everybody like a human being regardless. I don't know. Like I've very much been it doesn't matter as long as you're not hurting anybody. Like that has gone on since I was a kid. So when I introduced to these new concepts, I'm just like, oh, that's different. Okay, carry on, but that's not common. Like for fuck's sake, the neighbor across the street of the house that we lived in when we moved down here to Florida from Massachusetts, their fucking black cat was named the N-word. Not even kidding. So like this is where I was.
I apologize for all white people. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Like, so I'm just like,
no, yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean, the neighborhood, it was all white people in the neighborhood, and well, granted, the people across the street were their own thing, and they weren't bad people, but like it's still an issue. But then 2 doors down, my friend's mom was also she was white, but like she had like some Native American, and she was Buddhist. Like I actually almost became a Buddhist because of her, which was interesting when I decided I didn't want to be Christian anymore. But that's a whole other like side tangent. So like there was an eclectic mix of white people, but it was all white people. Like fucking like heterosexual, like there weren't any lesbians or gay men. It was just like straight white people and families all around there, or like single people. And again, yeah, I was in my early 20s when I met my first trans person, but it didn't really faze me other than I was curious. I had questions because, again, this is something like I had no idea. But it was around the same time I first heard the word atheist. I had been an atheist for 2 years and didn't even realize it because I had never heard the word. When I joined an e-cigarette forum and was talking about like something in one of the like side things, someone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm an atheist, blah blah blah," and I was like, "Okay, I think I know what that word means because I know what those like I know what a and I know what theist means, and like put them together. Like I think, but I had to actually Google it. Like I'm in my early 20s and I'm googling what is an atheist, okay." And so then I was like, "Oh shit, I'm an atheist," and I thought it was funny. Like that's how I found out I was an atheist. Because yeah, I had been non-religious for a while and I'd stopped believing any gods or anything like that. But yeah, first time I heard the word atheist was like my mid-20s. So
Nice. Or sometimes it's like the first time it registers. Like you've heard it before, but you're just like, man, and you never bothered to think about it or look it up. And then like one day it clicks and you're like, holy shit, this
I don't
actually
think I'd
applies to me.
ever
Like,
heard
I
it.
don't know.
Like
Yeah.
I honestly, and I mean, and like that's another thing. Like I cannot think of in the neighborhood that I lived in, I can't think of a single family or person that was a person of color in that neighborhood. Like there is a lot of like even if we don't have redlining anymore, there is still a lot of racial segregation that happens in communities around the country where it might be illegal to do redlining, but that doesn't stop, fucking racist fucking fuck, what is the word?
District, what do they call 'em?
Realtors. Racist
yeah,
realtors from basically only showing houses in one area to one group of people and showing in a different area to other groups of people. And
yeah.
so I don't know. Like
I think they also had something with city planners and districts, the way they did districting in certain places, where the same kind of thing was going on. They were like, we're going to put this housing district here, and we know that that's going to be where we put this group of people, and then here's this shopping district here, and so they did that.
And it was really weird because of the way the zoning was. Like the middle school that I went to, like there were only a handful of people of color. But because the neighborhood was on this side of the street, we were zoned for this high school. Whereas if it was directly across the street, I'd be zoned for the other high school. And the other high school that was more beachside, that was basically the white people high school where, minorities were in the minority. Whereas the high school I ended up going to, it was much more mixed as far, like there were still a lot of white kids there, but there were a lot more people of color at that school than any of the other high schools in the area. And I'm grateful for that because I honestly believe that that helped me to grow as a person by being exposed to people that I before then had limited experience with, because I could have counted on one hand the number of people of color that I really had any interactions with in a day-to-day setting before then, because my elementary school, there were only a handful of them, and my middle school, there were only a handful. But once I got to high school, like, again, white people were still the majority, but not by as much. And it was a much more diverse population, not only in the administration, but also like just the students as well. And yeah, I'm grateful for that because when it comes down to it, I don't think I would be too different of a person. At least I'd like to think not, because I was kind of already set in my thinking of people are people, and I'm going to judge them on whether or not they're an asshole as opposed to what they look like. But, who knows? Like, I might not be the same person that I am right now if I had gone to a different school or if we had moved to a different area where I didn't, end up being exposed to other people.
Yeah. Especially the younger you are. Like, so I have 2 cousins that are mixed race. I grew up around them. Like my older cousin is half black, half white, and then my younger cousin as well, right, from the same aunt. So, and I was just never like, I never knew any differently. He took care of me when I was, a little kid, and we rode around in the wagon and stuff like that. And I played with his GI Joes. And then there's just like such a high like Mexican, Hispanic, Latino population in the area that I am, where I grew up, that it's like, it's just, that was just the way it was. And some people speak Spanish and some people speak English. It's just like, what's really weird is like moving away from that. That was weird for me, just being in an all white area and seeing like the way that those people thought and the way that they acted towards other people. And then, so it's like, then you come back and you're like, oh, I'm not around a bunch of, I mean, there's still racism, but it's not, the same.
I mean, like it took a while. Like I think I'm the only person in my family that's dated outside of my ethnicity. Like, and because again, I base it on the person, not anything else. Like my son's father is Black and Indian, and my son is very white passing, but his father's mixed race, and like it took a while for my family to warm up to the idea that I wasn't going to date exclusively white people, and it started with my first non-white boyfriend was Asian. He was half Korean. And then there were a few others after that, but the one that I worried about with my family the most, considering there are quite a few racists in my family, was my current partner. We've been together now for over a decade. And like the fact that, he was Black and Indian, I was a little worried, like, not gonna lie. But like my family surprised me and they accepted him with open arms. And like, I was super grateful for that because, it wasn't going to change my opinion, maybe of them, but not of my relationship, but it ended up working out. And I'm really glad for that. And, both of my parents have actually grown a bit in regards to that. My mother has actually grown even more than my father, but that's because my father's kind of gone down that whole Fox News rabbit hole, which is kind of depressing. But like my mom has learned a lot more about like respect and personal boundaries because my son's autistic, and she at one point did not respect his personal boundaries and it caused an issue. And I told her, look, if you're not going to respect him, then you're not going to see him, like you are his grandmother, that's fine, but like this isn't about you, it's about him and what's best for him. And she realized the issue that you can't force affection on a child, like especially when they're autistic, but you really shouldn't anyway. Like I don't like the idea of us telling our kids that their aunts and uncles are allowed to hug and kiss on them whenever they want, even if they don't want it. I think that, everybody should be given at least a baseline of bodily autonomy where you're allowed to say, I don't want to be touched. But that's a whole separate issue altogether. But my mother, she realized after we had the conversation, she apologized. And to this day, she is respectful of his boundaries and she does not push it. And like, I have like sung her praises for it. And I know it's the bare minimum, but it shows that even somebody, in their 60s can still have room to grow and do better. And like, it gives me hope that, if people actually put in a little bit of effort, that maybe we can all try to do a little bit better,
Yeah. And yeah, that, at least most people, we're social creatures, whatever line you draw, it'll be at the familial line. You're going to be like, oh, I'm not going to, especially in that position, I don't want to lose contact with my grandchild. And once you draw that boundary and make it very clear, you're likely to change their minds most of the time, hopefully, I guess. It doesn't always work out that way, but.
No, it doesn't. And sometimes the best thing you can do is draw that line and remove toxicity from your life. Like, just because a person is a blood relative to you does not mean that it is healthy for you to have them in your life. And that is a decision that every person needs to make for themselves with regards to that. But do not feel bad if you need to excise family members from your life, because you only get this one life, and your mental health and well-being surpasses their feelings. Like, if they're causing you to be upset, don't let the fact that they are blood and that it might hurt their feelings to like cut them off. Don't let that change it if you decide that it would be best for you, and don't feel bad. Like, you are allowed to make those decisions for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I want to address Spooky's comment here in the side chat. I knew trans people for a while, but the thing that battered my head a bit was the first time someone I knew on the net changed their gender and came out as trans. Like you knew them for years as being one gender, but saying they're another gender. And then there's
It's
a
like
typo.
basically
You're
somebody
not.
you've known for years, like, and this person is Mike for like 10 years, but then all of a sudden it's like Mike comes out as Michelle, and it's that you got to try to flip that switch in your head. I've had that happen too with some people that I know that they came out more recently, and I don't think I've ever misgendered them, but I try to be very cognizant of that. But they know that if it ever has happened, to just call me out on it immediately, just remind me, that it's not done with malice. And none of them have ever been upset by that, because they know that it's not done in a malicious way. It was just hey, I've known you for 5 years, 10 years as this, and changing overnight is not easy. Like, I do my best, but I am human and thus fallible.
Yeah, I've done that as well. I haven't known anybody in the community that long, but I know that I've done it a couple of times, just slip of the tongue, and I'm immediately like, oh shit. And yeah, it happens as long as you're like mindful and you apologize and don't do it again, and don't get butthurt when people call you out. Like, it's like, whatever, we're humans. So on that note, though, it's 11:55 here. I have to go force myself to get out and do chores and stuff. But yeah, it's been a great conversation, and yeah, I don't. Do you have any like final thoughts on free speech or any of this, or kind of just?
Yeah, like, call out bullshit when you see it. Like, and like, try to make sure that you have like at least a few bullet points of what free speech is and what it isn't, so that when people are spreading like misinformation about free speech, you can correct them on that. Because I think that when it comes down to it, we can't count on the public school systems to teach our kids what free speech is. All right, baby, give me just a minute. I'm almost done. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But yeah, so like just explaining like what it is and what it isn't, and how, yeah, you have the freedom of speech to call your boss an asshole and not get arrested for it, but you're probably going to end up on unemployment if you do that. Like, freedom of speech does not mean freedom of consequences in a social setting. It just means that you won't be persecuted by the government for what you say.
Right.
So clearing up those misunderstandings, I think, would help. But other than that, also, like, if you see somebody like a politician or something advocating for cracking down on free speech, depending on like what they're saying, then maybe get involved and like try to not let them get elected, because we don't want to go any further down the fascist slope.
Yes, prevention is the key, right?
Absolutely.
Do you have any shows or anything coming up on your channel in the near future, or you want to promote?
Not really. I have not really been making any content lately. I've just been kind of doing my own thing. But on Wednesdays, Purple Rhymes with Orange does her stream in the afternoon, And then Thursdays, she does one at night. And I try to stop into those when I can. I honestly wasn't even planning on being on a stream today, but I saw your stream and I was in the chat, and then I saw that nobody else was here. So I was like, all right, I'll keep you company.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. And we
Absolutely.
finally got a
This
few
is
people.
fun.
We got Spooky and Phoenix and Jody and Will. No, a few people. Somebody else. Make sure we get everybody. Thank them. Oh, Christian Carpenter and Bugs, of course. So yeah, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. I tried to share your channel here, and it got all squirrely on me right there at the end. So it's
No
like,
worries.
okay, well, we'll do it later. I'll get it in the description or something. But thank you, Kitty, and much love to everybody else.
Absolutely.
And remember, just because you can scream fire in a theater doesn't mean that you should.